The first thing you learn in captivity is how loud quiet can be.
Not the peaceful kind. This was the kind of silence that sat on your chest and refused to move. The jungle never truly stopped making noise. Insects ticking like a broken clock, distant birds, the wet whisper of leaves. But inside the cage, the world felt muffled, like someone had wrapped my head in cloth and tightened it until my thoughts turned small. The bar were bamboo, thick, pale, and almost polite-looking in daylight. That's what made it worse. From a distance, it could have been a fence around a garden. Up close, it was a calendar made of vertical lines. Day after day, I stared through those lines and tried not to count them, because counting turns time into a weapon. I had been a Navy pilot. I'd been trained to trust instruments, to trust checklists, to trust my own hands. Up there, you always have options: altitude, speed, direction. Down here, the jungle swallowed everything. When they captured me, it wasn't dramatic the way movies want it. No heroic last words. No clean moment you can replay later and say, that was the turning point. It was just sudden. Confusion, shouting, hands, a rope, and then the slow realization that the war had changed shape, and I was now the part that gets filed away and forgotten. The camp itself was simple in the way a trap is simple, a clearing you only notice after you've stepped into it. Smoke from cooking fires, mud, a few huts, faces that watched without curiosity. They didn't need to hate me to keep me there. I was a problem to be managed, a body that had to stay accounted for. The hunger came first, not the sharp kind, but the steady kind that makes you think in circles. Your stomach stops being a sensation and becomes a clock. Every hour it reminds you you're losing ground. Your thoughts drift to food you don't even like. Bread, butter, anything warm. You start bargaining with yourself. If I get out, I'll never complain again. If I get out, I'll be grateful for everything. Then you catch yourself making promises like a child, and you feel angry, because anger at least still feels like control. They put me in a bamboo cage at night. The bars were close enough that you could touch two at once. You couldn't stand all the way. You couldn't lie flat without finding a sharp edge. Sleep became a game of inches and bruises. Rain would find its way through every crack. Mosquitoes didn't care about borders. I learned the routine fast. When you're locked up, routine becomes a language. You listen for the same steps, the same voices, the same moment they stop paying attention. Captivity is not one long horror. It's 1,000 tiny calculations. And underneath all that, quietly, stubbornly, I began building the only thing I still owned: a plan. Not a perfect plan. Not a Hollywood plan. Just an idea I could hold on to without it breaking. I knew the jungle would kill you faster than men could. Not quickly, patiently. It would drain you until you forgot what you were running toward. That meant if I ever moved, I had to be able to keep moving. Feet first. Always feet. That's what started the sandals. It sounds ridiculous, I know, like the kind of detail someone adds later to make the story cleaner. But that's how survival works. It gives you a small task so your mind doesn't collapse. I found old scraps. Pieces of tire rubber, torn bits of strap, anything that wouldn't dissolve the first time it met water. I worked slowly, quietly. Every motion had to look like nothing. I kept my face blank. I kept my hands busy. I learned to smile at the right moments, to nod like I understood the words I didn't understand. Inside, I was measuring distances I'd never walked. Inside, I was already moving through trees. Each night, when the bars closed in again, I would press my fingers against the bamboo, and imagine the sound it would make if it finally snapped. Not yet, I told myself. Not yet. Then one evening, the air changed. The camp felt distracted. Voices were louder. People moved with that careless energy that comes right before a mistake. I lay there in the cage, heart steady, pretending to be smaller than I was. And in my head, I said it once, quietly, like a prayer. Soon, the night I ran, I didn't feel brave. I felt careful. That's the thing people misunderstand when they hear escape. They imagine a single burst of courage, like you kick the door down and sprint into freedom. In real life, it's quieter. It's you listening so hard you can hear your own blood. It's you moving like the jungle itself might turn around and report you. I remember the damp first, how everything had a wet skin. The air wasn't air, it was water you breathed. The bamboo bars glistened faintly in the dark, and for a moment I just stared at them like they were a question. Then I moved. Hands first, fingers testing, not pulling. The cage had been built by men who never imagined someone would try to slide out like smoke. But they also never imagined a prisoner with nothing to lose but time. I'd learned where the bamboo flexed. I'd learned which binding was tired. I'd learned how to make my body smaller. I slid inch by inch until my shoulders cleared. My ribs scraped. I stopped breathing when it hurt, because pain makes noise if you let it. When I was out, I didn't stand up. I didn't run. I lay flat in the mud like I belonged there, like I had always been part of the ground. I listened for movement, for someone shifting, for a cough, for the simple sound that would mean they saw me. Nothing. The camp's fire was low. A few embers pulsed like eyes. Somewhere, someone murmured in their sleep. I could smell smoke and sweat and old rice. My heart hammered so hard I was sure it would call them over like a drum. I waited until my mind stopped shouting. Then I crawled. The sandals were tied to my feet with crude straps. They weren't comfortable. They weren't elegant. But when the mud tried to swallow my toes, the rubber fought back. Every step still hurt. My legs had gotten thinner than they should have been, my joints stiff from the cage, but the soles gave me a chance. I reached the edge of the clearing, and the jungle accepted me the way the ocean accepts a sinking ship. Without ceremony. Leaves slapped my face. Branches grabbed at my shirt. Vines snagged my arms like hands. The darkness under the canopy was deeper than the night sky. Thick, layered, alive. I couldn't see far, but I could feel direction in the slope of the land, in the way water collected, in the faint openings where air moved. I went for darkness, not distance. Distance was for later. Behind me, the camp noises faded. The first time I couldn't hear them anymore, a wave of panic hit me so hard I almost turned around. That's the trap. Captivity teaches you that safety is known. Even pain becomes familiar. Freedom is the unknown, and the unknown feels like a cliff. I forced myself forward. At some point, minutes or hours, I don't know, something cracked behind me. A stick, a step, or just my imagination twisting every sound into a nightmare. I froze. That was the moment I truly understood how fast a man can disappear. 1 second, you're a person with a name and a past, and the next you're just a shape in the leaves, trying to keep your breath from betraying you. I crouched low. The jungle around me buzzed and hissed like it was holding a conversation I wasn't invited to. My hands trembled. I pressed them into the mud to steady them. Then, voices, not close but close enough to make my mouth go dry. I heard the faint clack of something metal. A cough. A low, annoyed tone. They were awake. They were looking. I moved again, but not quickly. Quick is noisy. Quick makes mistakes. I placed each foot like I was stepping on glass. The rubber sandals sucked and released with the mud, a sound that felt impossibly loud. I kept thinking, don't fall, don't fall. Because falling means you curse, you gasp, you scramble. Falling means you leave a trail. The jungle floor dipped, and I slid down into a shallow drainage, water up to my ankles. The cold shocked me awake. Leeches, at least I thought they were leeches, brushed against my skin. I didn't stop to check. Stopping is how you get caught. I put the drainage between me and the camp, and I followed it the way a wounded animal follows instinct, downhill, away, anywhere that wasn't back. My legs burned. My throat felt like it had been lined with sand. Hunger wasn't even hunger anymore. It was a dull absence, like part of me had been hollowed out. And still, even with all that, something strange happened. For the first time in months, the bars weren't in front of my face. The sky, what little I could see through the canopy, belonged to me again. I didn't feel free. Not yet. But I felt motion. And motion was everything. Somewhere behind me a shout rose, sharp, sudden, angry. I didn't wait to find out if it was my imagination. I ran. I ran until the jungle stopped being a place and became a machine. The kind that doesn't care who you are. At first, running felt like victory, each step a statement. I'm out. I'm out. I'm out. But the jungle doesn't let you keep that rhythm. It makes you pay for speed. Roots rise like traps. Vines catch your ankles. The ground drops out without warning and turns your legs into a tangle of bruises and mud. So the run became a stagger. The stagger became a crawl. And somewhere in there, the adrenaline burned off and left me with the oldest enemy of all, time. I stopped under a tree so thick it felt like a wall. The leaves above me were layered like armor, barely letting light through. I pressed my back to the trunk and tried to breathe quietly, but my chest kept jumping like it had its own panic. I listened. Nothing close. No footsteps, no voices. Just the constant wet chatter of the jungle. Bugs, frogs, something distant that sounded like a bird and a scream at the same time. That's when I realized something that should have been obvious. Escaping the camp wasn't the finish line. It was the starting gun. I had no map, no compass, no idea where friendly anything was. I had only a direction that lived in my head, away from them, and the terrible understanding that away isn't a place you can survive forever. I started moving again, but now it wasn't about speed. It was about not leaving signs. I stayed off open ground. I stepped in water when I could. I moved through thick brush even when it tore at my skin, because torn skin was quieter than broken branches. The tire sandals helped, but they weren't magic. Every hour the straps rubbed deeper. The mud clung to them like glue, and the more soaked they got, the heavier they felt, like I was dragging two small anchors. The first time I noticed a leech, it was already feeding. I felt a soft pressure, like a thumb pressed to my ankle. When I looked down, there it was, dark and swollen, calmly taking what it wanted. I should have been disgusted. I should have panicked. Instead, I stared at it with a kind of exhausted curiosity like, Of course you're here too. I flicked it off. Another one took its place later. Then another. I stopped counting. I learned that the jungle collects you in small pieces. Hunger came back like a voice you can't ignore once it starts talking. At first it was just an ache, then a gnawing, then a full-body insistence. My stomach didn't rumble. It clenched. It cramped. It felt like it was trying to fold itself into nothing. I tried to eat what I could. Leaves that looked harmless. A fruit I didn't recognize. It tasted like sour water and regret. I drank from streams because not drinking wasn't an option, and I didn't have the luxury of worrying about what the water might do later. Later is a rich man's word. The days blurred. The jungle doesn't give you clean mornings and evenings. It gives you light and then less light. It gives you rain whenever it feels like it. It gives you heat that turns your sweat into a second skin and then chills that crawl into your bones. I kept seeing things that weren't there. A straight line of bamboo that looked like a fence. A dark shape between trees that looked like a man standing still. Once I could have sworn I heard my name. My name, said in a voice from home, soft, almost kind. That was the worst moment, because it made me want to stop. It made me want to turn my head and follow it. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste blood, just to anchor myself in reality. Pain was honest. Pain said, "You're still here. Keep moving." At night, I tried not to sleep. Sleep is surrender. Sleep is when you miss the sound that matters. But eventually your body makes the decision for you. I would sit with my back against a tree, knees up, arms wrapped around them, and my eyes would close. And in those short, broken blackouts, I kept waking up convinced I was back in the cage. I'd jolt upright, heart punching my ribs, hands clawing at air, looking for bamboo bars that weren't there. Every time, the jungle answered with silence, like it was amused. One day, I don't know which day, I found a trail. Not a road, not a path. A faint, pressed-down line where something had moved through often enough to change the plants. It could have been animals. It could have been people. I stood over it for a long time, breathing through my nose, weighing the risk. A trail can save you. A trail can lead you right back to the men hunting you. I stepped onto it anyway, because I was running out of choices. And because somewhere deep in me, a new thought was starting to form. Quiet, dangerous, hopeful. If there's a trail, there's a way out. The trail didn't feel like hope. It felt like a bargain. It was narrow, just a suggestion in the undergrowth, a place where the plants were broken a little lower and the mud was pressed a little flatter. The kind of line you only notice if you're desperate enough to look for patterns. I followed it the way you follow a stranger's shadow at night, close enough to keep it, far enough to run if it turns on you. The jungle changed when I stepped onto that trail. The silence wasn't silence anymore. It was listening. Every snapped twig sounded like a gunshot in my head. Every rustle behind me made my shoulders lock up. I started to move in bursts. 20 steps, stop. 30 steps, stop. Head up, ears open, breathe through my mouth so I didn't wheeze. My body was shrinking by the hour. I could feel it happening the way you feel a fever. Not as a number, but as a steady slide. My shirt hung wrong. My boots were long gone, replaced by the tire sandals that now felt like they were bolted to my bones. My knees trembled whenever I stood still too long. I kept thinking about the camp like it was still behind me, even when it couldn't be. That's what fear does. It doesn't follow geography. It follows you. The trail led to water. At first I heard it, a soft, constant hiss under the insect noise. Then I saw it, a stream, brown and fast, cutting through the trees. Water meant life, but it also meant people. People settle near water. People travel along water. People build villages near water. I crouched at the edge and waited. My stomach screamed when I saw the current, like it believed the water itself could be eaten. I drank anyway, long pulls that made my throat hurt, and then I forced myself to stop before I got sick. Downstream, I thought I heard voices. Not close, not clear, but enough to freeze me in place with my hands still wet and my mouth still open. I slid backward into the brush and stayed there until my legs cramped. I watched the stream through leaves and tried to decide whether my ears were lying again. After a while, the voices faded. Either they moved on, or they were never there. I didn't trust the relief. Relief is how you get sloppy. I moved upstream instead, away from where I'd imagined the sound. The ground along the bank was softer, and my feet sank with every step. The leeches came back like they'd been waiting. I could feel them finding me, little warm taps along my ankles and calves, and I didn't even have the energy to fight them properly. I just kept moving and let them take what they took. The trail climbed after the water. It became steeper, the trees thinner, the air slightly less wet. That should have helped. It didn't. Climbing made my vision pulse. I'd stop and the world would tilt. I'd start again and my legs would feel like they belonged to someone else. At some point I started talking out loud. Not full sentences, just small commands. Up, move, not here, not now. I told myself I was doing it to stay focused, but I knew the truth. I was afraid of the quiet. The quiet made room for the past to step in. Then, faint, impossibly clean, came a sound that didn't belong in the jungle. A thump. A distant rhythmic chopping. For a second I thought it was my heart, echoing in my skull. Then it came again, and again, and it got louder in a way that made my skin prickle. Helicopter. The word hit my brain like a flare. Not just an idea, an entire world. Radios, people, hands pulling you up, water that isn't brown, a voice speaking English. I turned in place, trying to locate it, but the canopy swallowed direction. The thumping seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I stumbled toward higher ground, slipping twice, grabbing branches so hard they snapped in my hands. The sound grew stronger, and then it faded. Like it had simply passed over me and moved on. Panic surged so sharp it almost made me nauseous. I started running again, stupid, loud, crashing through brush, because I couldn't let that sound leave without me. I burst out into a small opening, a patch of thinner trees where the sky showed through in torn pieces. I looked up, squinting into brightness. Nothing. Just clouds and harsh light. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something at the sky and demand it come back. Instead, I dropped to my knees in the mud and forced myself to think like a man who wanted to live. If aircraft were nearby, they'd be searching lines, grids. They'd be looking for movement, smoke, anything unnatural. I tore at the ground and gathered wet leaves, darker branches, anything that could make contrast. I didn't have a flare. I didn't have a mirror. I had mud, and hunger, and a body that was running out of fuel. The helicopter sound returned, closer this time. And with it came the worst question in the world. Is it ours or theirs? The helicopter sound came back like a memory that refused to die, steady, chopping, growing louder until it vibrated in my teeth. I stood in that thin patch of sky and tried to be smart, not desperate. Desperation makes you wave your arms like a drowning man. Smart is smaller, smart is deliberate. I grabbed what I could, dead branches, dry bark tucked under the wet layer, anything that would take a spark if I could coax one. My fingers were clumsy from hunger. My hands shook like I was cold, even though the air was thick and warm. I didn't have matches. I didn't have a lighter. What I had was friction and stubbornness and the kind of focus you only get when the alternative is disappearing. I scraped and twisted and worked the way I'd worked on everything in captivity. Quiet, patient, methodical. When a tiny ember finally caught, it felt like watching a star being born. I fed it slowly, shielding it with my body. I piled green leaves on top once the flame took, not to make fire, but to make smoke. The thick, dirty kind that doesn't belong in the jungle unless a man put it there. The smoke rose in a grey column, and I stared at it like it was a prayer. The helicopter swept closer. The sound turned into something physical, something you could measure. Each beat a step, each pass a chance. Then I saw it. Not clearly at first, just a dark shape sliding behind clouds. Then the sun caught it, and there was no doubt. A helicopter, real, with a belly and a tail and that familiar spinning blur above it. For half a second my brain still argued with itself. Friendly? Enemy? Because even hope had become suspicious. I stepped out farther into the opening and lifted both arms, slowly, like I was surrendering to the sky. My throat tried to close up. I wanted to shout, but my voice came out thin, barely a sound. I waved anyway. Big motions, not frantic, just unmistakable. The helicopter banked. That bank, just that small tilt, hit me harder than any beating. It meant someone had seen something worth turning toward. It meant I wasn't invisible. The aircraft came around again, lower. Wind from the rotors shoved the smoke sideways and slapped it into the trees. Leaves whipped and danced. Dirt and bits of debris skittered across the ground. And then I heard it. Faint at first, then clearer. An amplified voice, distorted by distance and rotor wash. I couldn't make out the words, but I recognized the shape of them, the cadence, the rhythm. English. My knees buckled so suddenly I had to grab a branch to keep from falling. The relief was so violent it felt like pain. I tried to step forward and my legs didn't want to obey. They were done. They'd carried me through hell, and now they were cashing out. The helicopter hovered, the world roaring around it. The trees bent. The smoke scattered. I raised one hand again, a weak signal now, and I saw movement in the open door. Figures inside, helmets, arms pointing. Something dropped from the aircraft. At first I thought it was a weapon, and my heart stuttered. Then it snapped open into a line. A sling, a harness, a lifeline. I lurched toward it, stumbling, half falling, hands out like a man reaching for the last rung of a ladder. The downwash spun the line, teasing it away from me. I grabbed, missed, grabbed again, fingers closing around canvas and webbing. Strong hands, or maybe just training, took over. I jammed myself into the harness the way they'd taught us in a classroom that had never smelled like this jungle. I hooked what I could, wrapped the straps around my body, and then I held on with everything left in me. The line tightened, the ground dropped. For a second I thought my heart would tear loose from my chest. The jungle fell away beneath me in a blur of green and smoke and shadow. Wind ripped at my clothes. My sandals, those ugly tire-cut miracles, kicked uselessly in the air. And then I was over the open door, hands grabbing me, hauling me in like cargo that mattered. The moment I hit the floor of the helicopter, the roar became muffled, like I'd been underwater and finally broke the surface. Someone shouted something close to my ear. Someone pressed a canteen to my mouth. Someone's gloved hand held my shoulder, steadying me, as if they were anchoring me back to the human world. I tried to speak. All that came out was a cracked sound. Half laugh, half sob. I looked down at my legs and saw the mud, the blood, the leech bites, the swollen skin. I looked at my hands and realized they were shaking uncontrollably. I looked back out the open door at the jungle shrinking beneath us. 6 months earlier, I'd been a man in a uniform. Now I was a man made of hunger and survival and stubborn bone. As the helicopter turned, the smoke column vanished behind the trees, and I understood something with sudden clarity. The jungle hadn't let me go. I had torn myself out of it. And even as the aircraft carried me toward safety, I knew the hard truth that comes after miracles. You can leave the jungle, but it doesn't always leave you.